So today the British Prime Minister David Cameron has announced that they are expanding the non-lethal aid to Ukraine. They will be providing medical training, logistical training, and also military training for the Ukrainian army. This is of course good and step in the right direction, but in our opinion is still far from enough, still far from that can stop Vladimir Putin in his aggression towards Ukraine. As promised before, we have drafted a template letter to David Cameron and as well to all the British members of Parliament that I urge you all sign and send to your local MP in your constituency. The elections are coming, so there is a good chance that you will get a response and that your voice will be heard. I will read out this letter for you with the main arguments. The Right Honourable MP. Evidence is mounting that Russia is directly involved in what amounts to an invasion of Ukraine, as well as supporting and arming separatist militias. Thousands of Russian troops with tanks, heavy artillery, missiles are on Ukrainian soil, fighting against the Ukrainian army, destroying Ukrainian cities, towns and villages, and killing civilians. Now is the time for the international community to respond. Not just with words, but with action. Action that will demonstrate strength and resolve against Russia's aggression. Appeasement of the aggressor is not an option. History should have taught us that. Russia previously invaded Georgia, and in March last year, Crimea was illegally annexed. After a soft response from the West, Putin went further and did the same in eastern Ukraine. Only military resistance by the Ukraine managed to at least hold off Putin's advance. Again, appeasement has shown only to lead Putin to undertake further acts of aggression. Diplomatic efforts, peace talks and negotiations have failed to stop Putin. Peace agreements reached in Geneva, Normandy, Minsk I and Minsk II, every single time have been bluntly violated by Putin's criminal regime. Immediately after signing the Minsk II agreement, he sent in more tanks and more troops and captured yet another strategically important city of Debaltseve, hoping for yet another weak response from the West. Diplomacy has obviously reached its limits. The Western government's threats to increase the economic costs of this aggression for Russia are not being backed up by action. Although the human and economic costs for Ukraine continue to rise. Each time the West considers taking tougher sanctions against Russia, Putin takes a step back. The West then softens its stance, hoping for peace. And after this moment has passed, Putin moves 2 steps forward. Typical salami tactics. Today, Russia is breaching the Budapest Memorandum, the UN Charter and the Helsinki Final Act, and has become an aggressor, threatening Ukraine's sovereignty and seeking to redraw territorial boundaries by force. In 1994, in exchange for guarantees of territorial integrity from the United Kingdom, United States and Russia, Ukraine gave up its nuclear arsenal and drastically reduced the size of its army. Ukraine has been a faithful ally of the West, taking an active part in NATO's military operations in Iraq, Kosovo and UN's peacekeeping operations in Africa. Today, Ukrainian territorial integrity has come under Russian attack. The Ukrainian government has pleaded for help from its guarantors, and all that it gets in response from the UK government it is 1,000 helmets and some medical kits, sleeping bags and UK medical treatment for only 3 Ukrainian wounded soldiers. This amounts to almost nothing, taking into account the scale of war that is raging in eastern Ukraine. In fact, a British volunteer organisation, London Euromaidan, has managed to collect donations in Britain, bought and shipped to Ukrainian army and victims of war, over 30 tons of supplies, including uniforms, helmets, thermal underwear, etc. This amounts to more than the whole aid package from the British government to Ukrainian army. The report of the House of Lords EU Subcommittee on External Affairs came to the same conclusion, that the British government was not active enough in helping Ukraine. I quote, "As one of the 4 signatories of the Budapest Memorandum 1994, which pledged to respect Ukraine's territorial integrity, the United Kingdom had a particular responsibility when the crisis erupted. The government has not been as active or as visible on this issue as it could have been. We welcome the government's realistic appraisal of relations with Russia and recognition of the strategic challenge posed by the Russian regime. However, the government has not developed a strategic response for the long term and should now do so." These are the words from the report from the House of Lords. The UK government needs to supply defensive weapons to Ukraine in order to increase the Ukrainian army's ability to defend against Russian attack, and by raising the cost of aggression, dissuade Moscow from further escalation. Dr. Liam Fox, the former Defense Secretary, is also supporting this idea. Dr. Fox said, "The Ukrainian conflict has actually brought the shadow of conflict to the European continent. Certainly for the first time since the fall of the Berlin Wall. This is a very serious issue. It is also about the credibility of NATO and the Western Alliance. I think the defense of the Baltic, for example, begins in Ukraine. We should be giving Ukrainians the weapons they need to defend themselves against this external threat. This is about their territorial integrity. The provision of military assistance should not be intended as a standalone policy. It should be a piece of an overall strategy that consists of Western financial support to sustain Ukraine and economic sanctions on Russia designed to effect a change in Moscow's policy towards Ukraine. The current set of sanctions has done little harm to Putin's regime. Definitely much less than the effect of the falling oil price. Russia's actions deserve Iran-style economic sanctions, particularly against the financial, defense and energy sectors. Cutting Russia out of SWIFT banking system, political isolation of Putin, freezing the assets of Russia and Russian oligarchs, many of which are here in the UK. Those oligarchs that are close friends with Putin and are supporting his criminal regime. Putin's actions against Ukraine are a threat to the peace and stability of the whole of Europe. The Baltic states may be next. If President Putin is allowed to redraw territorial boundaries by force, with impunity, everyone's security and stability is in jeopardy. Ukraine has lost thousands of soldiers killed in action and more than 5,000 civilians, including children. But not only Ukrainians are dying. The recent British death toll of Putin victims is murder of Litvinenko on the streets of London and 10 British citizens killed by the Russian missile on board the flight MH17. Their murder shall not go unpunished. Russian bombers loaded with missiles are seen regularly rehearsing their attack missions near British airspace, with their transponders switched off, endangering civil airplanes. Containing Putin's aggressive regime is therefore in the great interest of Britain's national security. I urge you to support Ukraine by calling on the UK government and its international partners to implement the strongest possible Iran-style sanctions against Russia, and to provide direct military and humanitarian assistance to Ukraine, as requested by the Ukrainian government, in its fight for sovereignty, democracy and European values. Ukraine is now fighting to protect peace and stability in Europe from the aggressive criminal regime of Vladimir Putin, and it needs our support. Thank you very much.